Hi everyone, I hope we're live today. My name is Ana Moya. I'm a professional development specialist with the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, and I'm here with
Manny Talavera. I'm also a professional development specialist with ISAC.
Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about the different types of admissions with college, and then we're also going to be talking about some of the deadlines, and we're going to be talking about some of those application fees that come along with it. So we'll go ahead and get started. So we're going to be talking about the two most popular ones and the ones that create a little bit of confusion with students. It's going to be early decision and early action. Do you want to take a go at early decision, Manny?
Sure. So early decision isn't as popular as it used to be. It's really reserved for more highly selective institutions. And so with an early decision, it's essentially a binding contract that whatever institution that you apply, a student would apply for an early decision and they get admitted, they have to drop and withdraw themselves from all the other institutions that they've applied to. And so reason why it's not as popular, in part because then it really limits the students. And have heard of situations where students who have found difficulty in the school wanting to go to a school that they applied early decision either by mistake or because, well, I thought I wanted to go to this school, but I really want to go to another school. And so it's that miscommunication. It is essentially an early application. It mirrors early action, but early action, the difference between early action and early decision is that binding piece. Now with early action, institutions can have various phases of them. And they can be in early as October, November, and they may have a second phase in December, or maybe even January, depending on the admission cycle at that institution.
Yeah, so I think with early decision, although it might be a little bit scary just because of that binding piece that comes along with it, the legally binding piece that comes with it, I think if you have a student or if your student is really interested in a school and they have their heart set on it and they know they want to attend that school, early decision would be a good way. It lets the school know that they're really, really committed to it. So it's one thing where they might want to apply to early decision. That's why some students apply to that. With early action, like Manny mentioned, you don't have that binding piece to it, but it also lets the schools know that they're really interested in going into there too.
Right. Yeah. And so it's really helpful for institutions. You can think about it in their eyes, like, wow, you must really want to come to this institution if you're willing to just drop and withdraw yourself from other institutions with early decision. And with early action, if institutions offer an early action deadline, you're going to get a sort of a response, whether you've been admitted or not, much sooner. So for students who just can't wait, right, the Google generation, we want to get our responses relatively quicker, while it may or may not be the same day or the next day, but it's definitely a much faster response for students, so they can start planning ahead and really investing themselves in the institutions that the institution that they really want to enroll in.
I personally, did you have any schools that you could say, like, if I could do it all over again? I personally didn't apply to any schools for early action or early decision, but if you could go back, did you apply to any or would think of applying to any?
Well, I would have to put myself way back into my sophomore year, which was sort of the worst year I've had academically. But going back to when I was applying to school, I didn't know anything about early action or early decision. I would look at whatever deadline the institutions have and make sure I'd had everything by that point. Because not that I didn't care where I ended up, it's just that I really didn't know. I was first generation college student, and so I was really just navigating in the dark, trial and error, finding out what works, what didn't work, and really trying to learn from my mistakes. Like for example, I know with one institution, I applied by mistake early action now that I think about it, and that was Northwestern. Now, I thought I had been applying to Northwestern University, which I was cracking a joke with Anna earlier, and I use this joke all the time because I was like, oh, I got into Northwestern, not knowing that it was a community college in, I can't even recall what suburb, but in the south suburb of Chicago. And so that just goes to speak as to sort of my experience and what I was going through and really not knowing the process.
Well, yeah, definitely one thing to know with that is know where you're applying to and check on the names, even if it's college, university. So that's one tip. So to move along with the types of admissions that there are out there, we also have the rolling admissions, which they're kind of, how would you explain rolling admissions?
So rolling admissions, if you think about a regular admissions process, which there's nothing special about it, say their deadline's January 15th, and really that's it. You apply by January 15th, and you probably get a decision by April. Some institutions are a little bit better about responding to applications and sending those admissions, those acceptance letters out. With rolling admissions, they can accept students well into the summer. Some institutions, especially community colleges, they'll accept you the day before classes start. They'll accept you before the day classes start, and you can select your classes that same day or even maybe even the next day. And so it provides the greatest amount of flexibility for students, especially for students who really didn't have much support in college, in high school in their senior year, maybe didn't really feel comfortable with, say, the teachers or college and career counselors that they were working with. And so it is relatively last minute for students who wait the day before, but at least it provides sort of a pathway for students who just woke up, got out of bed, and thought, you know what, I want to go to college. I didn't think about this earlier, right? They have a lot of limitations, I mean, where they can go, but at least it can get them going, and could essentially allow them to transfer to a four-year university down the road.
They decide to, yeah. So one of the things I thought for sure that the only types of institutions that had rolling admissions would be community college. But just before we started the live event, Manny started telling me about some institutions that also have rolling admissions, which I thought institutions that are not community colleges. So I thought that was really interesting. Which one was the one that you mentioned right off the top? I think it was Aurora University.
Aurora University, I saw that, which is a private institution in west suburbs of Chicago. Western Illinois University, they accept students, I believe we saw like August.
Yeah, all the way until August.
Yeah, and that's pretty late because classes will start in a couple of weeks. Now, Western is a mid-sized institution, so classes may fill up pretty quickly. So the options of what courses students can take will be a little bit limited, but at the very least, it does provide sort of more options for those students who are a little bit later in the process.
Nice. Also, when we have some admissions, we also have priority admissions and then regular admissions. I think the biggest thing with priority admissions, if there's institutions that offer it, students should definitely take advantage of it if they know they want to go to it. Just because for the priority admissions, it lets them know ahead of time that the student's really interested in going into the institution as well. As with the regular admission, usually the deadlines for the regular admissions, the most common ones that I saw were usually around December 1st, anywhere between December 1st and January 15th. So for all of the deadlines that we're going to be talking about, if your student is interested in a certain institution, they should definitely look into their website. That's like a great starting point because that's where they'll have all of the deadlines. And the different types of deadlines. Even with the public universities here in the state of Illinois, there's a ton of different deadlines that we were looking through to try to figure out, to give you guys like an average of what a regular deadline is or any of the deadlines. The most common thing for early action we found was November 1st. For all of the regular admissions or priority admissions, it varied from institution to institution. So yeah.
And so the thing with priority deadline too is that institutions can have a priority deadline and a regular deadline. And so as Anna was mentioning, with a priority deadline, students will apply, get the most consideration, and typically get a quicker response. And it certainly looks good if you're applying to an institution that has a priority deadline and you're applying by that priority deadline. It's much helpful.
Yeah. Also, we forgot to mention, we just got super ahead of us. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment below, and we'll try to answer them as we go or towards the end of the Facebook Live event. So also one of the things to know, there are also bridge programs with types of admissions. We want to note that because bridge programs are programs that usually happen between like a university and their local community college, where a student can attend the university for 2 years, and then, no, they can attend the community college for 2 years and then transfer into the university. Most often we see it like if a student is interested in a certain major that might be a little bit tough to get into once they apply to college, they would go into the bridge program, take whatever classes the university advises them to take at the community college, and then they'd be able to transfer into their major once they finish their 2-degree program. So that's also a great opportunity. That's something I didn't know about. I decided to go straight into a 4-year institution. But I do remember applying to my local community college. If I would have known there was a bridge program, I think I would have saved a little bit of money maybe.
Yeah, and a lot of them, scholarships are tied into 2+2 bridge programs. Some institutions offer sort of a guaranteed admissions that once you complete the program at your local community college, you'll automatically get into that institution that has the partnership. And part that's really helpful with these bridge programs is that students know exactly what courses they need to take. There's a pathway to it. They take those courses. They know ahead of time what's expected of them versus a student who is not too sure where they want to enroll after community college. And so this sort of allows them to understand exactly what it is that they need to do. And so especially for students who have that mindset that like, I need to know exactly what I need to take. I don't want to dilly-dally. I want to graduate in 2 years, get into a 4-year university, get my bachelor's degree, not waste any time, or extend my time more than I need to.
Yeah. Also, I think we both gotten the chance to work with students one-on-one, and I think it's important to know that with bridge programs or 2-year programs, oftentimes I work with students that would literally come to me right before graduation. They're like, I'm ready to apply for college. I'm ready to apply for a certain university, where you know the deadline passed already. Bridge programs are also like a great thing to look at, or as Manny mentioned, 2+2 years admissions. That 2+2 is going to be when you're 2 years, also known as bridge programs, but not directly known as bridge programs. It's going to be programs where you're in community college for 2 years and then you transfer into the university, like you mentioned. But there's also alternative admissions, if you want to talk a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, so sometimes they have another name called conditional admissions, or students who have been admitted on a conditional basis. So alternative admissions are essentially is a process for students who don't quite meet the academic requirements or the minimum academic requirements to sort of get into that institution, but they still demonstrate a lot of potential. One example is Proyecto Palante at Northeastern Illinois University, NEIU, which is Project Forward, that program, Project Forward, also serves as an admissions body for the institution, where they can actively go out and recruit students into this program, where they undergo additional courses. They may have to take a course over the summer. They may have to go under mentorship of another student who may have gone through that program, or a student who falls within their demographic, and it just provides that additional support. And with some institutions with alternative admissions, they don't allow a student to declare a major until they get through the program, but it's a great alternative for students who just maybe high school wasn't their thing, but they came really close. They demonstrated a lot of potential. It's sort of helpful for institutions too when they are looking at students holistically, where they're just not looking at a GPA. They're not just looking at their class rank, because they're not looking at their ACT and SAT scores, because those are just numbers. They don't really tell a whole story. But it really gives opportunity for students who may not have done so well academically, but again, demonstrate that potential to do well.
Yeah, I think that would have been something really good for me to know when I was in high school, because there were certain schools that I really had my heart set on, but because I didn't do as well as I would have liked on my ACT during high school, I think if I would have looked into that, I would have gone for it. I applied to a lot of universities and colleges, but I didn't give my chance for those reach schools that that I would have hoped. Now you said something, you mentioned a holistic review. Can you explain that to our audience?
Right, so holistic review, and so it's looking at the entire application versus, okay, what's your ACT score? Does it match with our 50th percentile? It's looking at your GPA rank, the courses you took, the rigor of the courses that you've taken, and what is available at your school. But it's looking at sort of the entire experience and looking past the student as numbers and looking at them as individuals, and looking at their potential as to how their personality can fit with their institution. Because institutions are looking to, further diversify their students, and again, just because a student does well academically may not transfer over into the college they're applying to.
Yeah.
And so with the programs like this, with the admissions process being a little bit more holistic, it allows students who may not think that they have the potential to succeed in that institution, or may not think of themselves as college material, to really sort of blossom.
Nice. Another thing to know with the applications, I mentioned that you guys should check online to see about their deadlines. So let's move a little bit forward into the actual applications. One of the things that I think it's becoming more popular now, or I don't know if I didn't hear about it when I was in high school, but it's going to be the Common Application. So the Common App is going to be an application where students kind of get to fill their demographic questions, and then instead of having to fill one application at each school and having to fill the demographic portion of every application, with the Common App, they get to fill sort of like those common questions, and then they get to fill the different parts of the different applications from every other school. But for the demographic portion, they only have to fill it up one time. So now it's becoming something that, like I mentioned, I don't know if I just didn't learn about it because it's not something that's new, but there are a lot of schools that are also in the Common App. So that's one way to start your application process as well. I would say the best bet is to look into, again, whatever institution you're looking to apply to, and it'll tell you there whether they have their separate application or if they have, or if they're in the Common App. Now, one suggestion that I have is look into all of the institutions that you want to apply to, and then check on there how many of those institutions are actually going to be on the Common App, because sometimes it may just make more sense to fill out separate ones. Do you remember how many applications you put for schools besides Northwestern College?
Which have been Southwestern in my case.
Yeah.
That's what threw me off. I applied to 5 institutions off the top of my head, and I didn't know about the Common App. I remembered applying to college and just remember them being time consuming. And so if I had known, I may have applied to more institutions, in part because, I can just send one application and work with that and find these institutions versus having to go through each school, through their entire application process, which can be more daunting because, as we know, with the more institutions that we apply to, the more deadlines we have to keep track of.
Yeah.
And so it's really helpful that it's a little bit more streamlined. In Illinois, there are, at least nationwide, there are over 800 institutions that are on the Common App. It's not just limited to schools in the United States. I saw some schools in China and Europe, and so they do have a little bit of international outreach. It's not in every single country, but I think that's pretty neat that a student, say here in Illinois, could apply to an institution in China or in Europe through the Common App.
Well, that's, yeah. That's a lot. I didn't know that it was like worldwide. I didn't look into those international schools. Also, with the Common App, it's also important to look at the application fees that the schools have. That's also transitioning into our next topic. We saw for the state universities, the public state universities in the state of Illinois, the application fees range from anywhere between $25. The highest one we saw was $60. So with that is with the application fees, with the applications, there's also application fees associated with them. So one of the things that I did, because like I said, I applied to a lot of them, I was fortunate enough to have, I got waivers, application fee waivers for all of them.
And how did you get waivers?
I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure it was my high school counselor helped me out with those. But I was also part of a program that was with my school that was kind of like a, like, I don't want to mention names, but it's sort of, it was a college program to help students get to college. So I was part of the program at my school, and I think I applied to it. It was so long ago, I can't even remember how I got them, but I do remember I never paid for an application fee. Now, we were going to around the state this last month, and some of the schools said that if a student is really interested in the school and the only thing that's keeping them from going to that school is the application fee, to definitely reach out to like the college admissions to see if they offer an application fee waiver.
Right, because if we think about it, the application fee, maybe $25 or $60, may not seem a lot, but for our families and students who are living paycheck to paycheck, $25 is, say, maybe a meal for 2 or 3 days. $60 is maybe a cell phone bill,
Yeah.
2 cell phone bills. And so you always want to always recommend students check in with the institution to see what that process is like. And this is sort of the place where students may feel uncomfortable asking for a waiver, may not know that it exists. Like, I didn't know application waivers existed, and I would have qualified for them. I just didn't know. But just make sure no one tells my dad who was paying all these application fees, because he's probably going to want me to pay him back. But it's just important to know and help our students sort of advocate for themselves to seek that extra need, that assistance if they need it.
Yeah. I think also with the application fee waivers, the most common way for a student to get them waived is if they're part of a free or reduced lunch program. I would highly, highly suggest that this students stay in touch with their counselors or ask their counselors, not only how to get the application fee waivers, but if they are available or if they would qualify for them, how many they could get as well, because there are certain schools that have a limit of how many application fee waivers they give to students. So have your students look out for those too.
Yeah, the earlier they do so, the better. Some institutions even accept like NACAC's version of a fee waiver, which is the National Association for College Admissions Counseling. And so that's helpful that some institutions may have their own, some institutions will accept others, and so it's just sort of gives the student a little bit more peace of mind.
Yeah. So do we have any questions so far? We do not. Also, well, let's talk about some of those pieces that come along with applying to a school. So we mentioned the application fee waivers. We mentioned the types of admissions, some of the deadlines. Like I said, with the deadlines, it gets really tricky just because no school that I saw had like the same deadlines. There could be similar schools, but they're, for the most part, the early action deadline was November 1st. For regular admissions was December 1st or between December 1st and January 15th. So look into that, but let's also talk about some of the pieces that go into the application process. I know one of the biggest ones is having like your transcripts. So maybe knowing where to get your transcripts from. So talk to your counselors about that too, with where they can request the transcripts, and if they have to, how many they could request too, because if the counselors are sending them to the school electronically, there could be costs associated with the school, for the schools with that, so having them send that to them. Did you have any issues with transcripts or anything like that you recall?
Not until I got into college. So I went to Roosevelt University, downtown Chicago, their Chicago campus, Loop campus. And I didn't know until I got in and said, we didn't get your final transcript. You need to know that you graduated from high school. And so I was like, okay. And so I just went back to my high school. I don't remember which day. It was all within the same week. I just showed up with a book bag and I was like, okay, well, I'm ready to take my classes. Like, actually, you don't take classes in orientation. So again, like me being first generation, I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. But it was really helpful to sort of get that guidance, because institutions won't enroll you. They won't even disperse their aid until you prove that you've graduated from high school as part of the verification process, where institutions verify the information that you report on the FAFSA to make sure that it is indeed accurate. And one of the requirements for federal state aid and for federal aid and state aid is that you graduate from high school. And so I had to go run around and go and prove that. And when I showed up, at my high school, because I was no longer enrolled, it was no longer free. So I had to pay for it, and I didn't have cash on me, so I had to drive back home and go back. So it made for a very long Friday.
Well, for me, it was sort of the same thing too. Once I decided, I went to Dominican University, and once I decided that I wanted to go there and I was admitted there, it was literally 1 week before classes started. And because I had graduated from high school, and this was summertime, and I love my counselors because I literally went back to school. I sent them a text, let them know that I needed my transcripts. So we were able to get the transcripts, but I was also running around back and forth trying to get that and trying to get that to the school so that I was able to have everything set up once I started school. So definitely giving yourself time, knowing what you need to turn in, and staying in touch with your admission counselor at the institution you're planning on attending would be really, really helpful once you are already into college.
Yeah, it helps. It seemed like Anna was probably checking her email. Maybe that's why she was a little bit more on top of it. I wasn't as a student, and so when I got into Roosevelt, there was a list of things that I needed to do that I just never did, in part because I just wasn't checking my email. I didn't understand the importance of it really until I was in college.
Yeah, well, there was this one thing you mentioned at the beginning of it. You said that you were a first-generation student. Just so that we know what terms we're talking about, can you talk about what first-generation student means?
Sure. So you're a first-generation student. You're the first person in your family to go to a traditional college or community college. Now, for example, I have an older sister, but we're all part of the same generation. Just because she graduated college before me doesn't mean that she is, but I'm not. And so because we're part of the same generation, we're both considered first-generation college students. Some institutions have their own very particular definition of it. I've seen like DePaul University defines first generation if you're the first in your family to go to a four-year college or community college or traditional college university in the United States. Some institutions, well, if you have a parent that got their bachelor's degree in another country, you may not be considered a first generation student. And so some institutions have their own definitions, but a sort of uniformal acceptance of that definition of first generation students that you're first in your family to go to college.
And I only brought it back because I like how you mentioned it, that you weren't aware of early action or early decision because you were a first generation student. So a lot of the times when, schools come to talk to, institutions come to talk to students when they're in high school and they're like throwing these terms at them, it could be a little bit confusing, especially for first generation students. So I could definitely relate to that, not knowing first of all the terms or the different types of admissions, but I really like that, how you, mentioned that with the terms. So it's important for your students, if you know your student's a first generation student, that when you're talking to them about the college admission process, that you're also letting them know, giving them the different terms. So when you do have institutions come talk to your students, they actually understand or process the message that's being sent to them.
Right, and kind of really helped spark my mind when I was talking about priority deadlines, and I remember looking at some institutions and I saw. I remember seeing priority and I saw a date and I thought, well, they're not going to accept me because I passed that deadline. And so let's have students not confuse priority with their final deadline, because institutions can still accept students past their priority deadline. Now, they give more consideration to students that applied prior, but the students who have applied prior that may have gotten accepted, but since you applied afterwards, you may be put on the wait list, be placed on the wait list. But students, say, who were accepted during that priority, before the priority deadline, may enroll in a different institution. So those spots can always open up. And so just always encourage your students to apply. If it's past the priority deadline, to just apply anyway, in part because you never know. Now, for institutions that are no longer accepting applications, always check with the institution first to see if they are, because sometimes the information isn't always accurately reported online, because you really just never know sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I think we still don't have any questions, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them on the comment section at any time. We'll try to respond to them. Also, we just want to remind you guys that we're going to be live next Wednesday as well. I believe it's going to be in Spanish, a Spanish session next week. So feel free to tune in, let everyone know we're on here. And then even though we have certain topics for the Facebook Live events, if you guys have questions about the college going process, feel free to ask it, even if it's not the topic we're talking about, because we're more than happy to answer them for you guys. But that's going to be all for today, or unless you have anything else to add.
No, that's it.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Yes.